Bonjour, good morning everybody. Welcome to our Fish Intel launch event webinar. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. We're overwhelmed by the interest for our new project. I think we have over 155 people who are registered from countries as far as Canada, Peru and Australia, I've been told. So this is really exciting, and we can't wait to get going and tell you all about our new project. So my name is Dr. Emma Sheehan. I'm an Associate Professor of Marine Ecology at the University of Plymouth, and we are the lead for this project. So you should have already been emailed a programme for the speakers this morning. But I will present just quickly now a brief outline of the project. I'll remind you of some of the housekeeping that we just had scrolling on the opening slides. And then we have 5 speakers today. They're all project partners from Fish Intel. We will start off with 2 keynote speakers from both sides of the channel. Then we have 3 speakers, followed by a break and a Q&A session. So if you have any questions for our speakers this morning, please use the Q&A function, and then our team will field these questions to our presenters at the Q&A. We then have time for 2 more speakers, and they will take their questions directly after their talks. So again, please send any questions that you have using the Q&A function, and our team will present those to the presenters after their talk. I'm trying to remember to speak slowly because we have some amazing interpreters today that allows all of our talks to be translated into French and English, which is fantastic. Okay, so our slides. So this is where we are today. We're presenting from the beautiful city of Plymouth. And just to remind you of the key housekeeping for this morning is in your Zoom controls, click the interpretation button and click the language that you would like to hear. So there's 2 options there, to hear only in English and only in French, and then you have an option to mute the original language audio. You'll be kept on mute with the video off throughout. So that's all of our audience participants. Please, as I said, please do use the Q&A function to ask questions about the presentations. And this will be monitored by us. And as I said, the team will field those questions to the presenters. But do also use the chat function to talk to each other, to share your opinions. So we won't be using the chat function to send questions to our presenters, but yes, please do use that to share your opinions and to talk to each other. So Fish Intel is a collaboration between project partners in the UK, France and Belgium. In total, we have 12 project partners. In England, we are the University of Plymouth, the University of Exeter, the Isles of Scilly Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority, CFAS, which is the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science, and the Marine Conservation Society. On the French side, we are IFREMER, the National Institute for Ocean Science, the University of Brest, France Energy Marine, which is the French Research Institute for Energy Transition dedicated to offshore renewable energies, LPO, which is the League for the Protection of Birds from Brittany. And we have two French fishery committees, the Normandy Regional Committee for Fisheries and Marine Farming, and the Finistère Fisheries and Marine Farming Committee in Brittany. Then we have a Belgian partner, FLIS, which is the Flanders Marine Institute. Fish Intel stands for Fisheries Innovation for Sustainable Shared Interchannel Resources. Fish Intel uses underwater animal tracking techniques to help understand the small and large-scale movements of marine species across the France-England Channel region. Using 7 pilot sites across the channel, we will identify which sites and habitats are important to our species, including artificial habitats created by offshore wind farms, offshore aquaculture, and shipwrecks that may provide positive benefits for marine species. This research will aid authorities across the region to implement ecosystem-based fisheries management plans. And overall, Fish Intel aims to enhance water and habitat quality across the FCE region, recover fish populations, and promote the sustainable use of the marine environment. The species of interest that I mentioned are 4 in total, and that is the Atlantic bluefin tuna, European bass, pollock, and crawfish. And we selected these species to represent different trophic groups in our marine ecosystem that are all commercially very important species. So as I said, we have 7 pilot sites that we're focusing our efforts in order to monitor these species across the whole of the France-England Channel region. So our focus sites on the UK side are the Isles of Scilly and Cornwall, South Devon, Sussex, and then on the French side, Mer d'Ivoire, Côte d'Armor, Seine Bay, and then in the far eastern reaches of the Channel in Belgium, we have the Life Watch network. And Fish Intel has only started this year, but we're really pleased that already lots of different organisations are interested in joining this project and this initiative and network. So already on the French side, there is a new project which we're building on Fish Intel called Fish Off, which Liddy will tell you more about later on. And also we've just heard that the Channel Islands have agreed to come together and build their own network within the Fish Intel network, right in the middle of the channel. So this will provide excellent opportunities for the project going forward. So that's really great news. Right, so that's all from me. I'm now going to hand over to our first keynote speaker. Is Jean-Luc Solant from the Marine Conservation Society. I will stop sharing my screen and hand over to you.
Okay, I'll hopefully be able to share my screen with everybody. I hope we can see that.
Yeah, we can just, yeah, perfect.
Okay, lovely. So thank you very much, Emma. It's a genuine joy to be part of such an exciting project for my organisation and for me personally. I represent an organisation, an NGO that is over 30 years old. We operate programmes of activity in pollution and litter, in fisheries, in advising the public in sustainable fisheries and informing supermarkets of what fish they should buy at the sustainable level. And then my department is in ocean recovery, which is more about holistic ecosystem protection for the benefit of all aspects that the oceans can give us, from climate change effects to water purification and to essential fish habitat. And recently I've been working with lecturers and academics like Emma and at University of Exeter and University of Glasgow to try and understand the importance of habitat in marine protected areas for fish populations at juvenile stages and at adult stages. So from that area of work and the development of huge numbers of marine protected areas, and as we develop more management for those marine protected areas, this project has come at the perfect time. So I want to ask the question from an NGO perspective: what does society want from this project? Well, we hear a lot about the problems of Brexit, sadly. But we have some excellent scientists across La Manche who want to integrate their knowledge to ensure that we have future sustainable fisheries. So we want to move away from the short-scale politics of access of waters and how much fish we can catch to the real science behind sustainable stock quota management and, for me, area-based management. Our fisheries have collapsed in the past 100 years. It's undoubted. Our target fisheries for things like bass and cod and tuna. But there are signs of recovery of crawfish, one of the project species, and bluefin tuna. We want fish for the future, all of us. So we think this project is part of that. The excellent work that is being developed technically from the project partners and other people doing tracking of marine organisms is a wonder for our public. That is something our organisation tries to teach or educate and inform our public about. Programs like Blue Planet 2 were amazingly taken up by the public. So we need to see more of that interaction. And the science that is occurring for these animals is extraordinary and very, very visual for our public to understand the wonders of the deep. And then more prosaically, more for our managers and practitioners in the project moving forward, we need to understand that the seabed is the place of life. Particularly in our wonderful continental shelf waters, which are so similar off the coast of Cornwall as they are off the coast of Brittany, we have shared resources that provide the habitats for essential services for mankind. And this may be the case in developing artificial structures such as wind farms. And we need to find out. We need to find out the pluses and minuses ecologically of things like wind farms. But it seems that some of the science is showing positive trends for fish retention within these sites. So we need to understand that in the complexity of all these aspects for society. And an ecosystem approach is helpful for understanding fish movements. This diagram on the right comes from an academic in Glasgow, and the movement of animals is not restricted to one type of habitat. They move between muddy inshore grounds to offshore reefs in some circumstances. How do we protect certain habitats in certain places? Which multitude of habitats do species use? And then, are the habitats protected for other parts of the ecosystem? And then are they protected for the fish themselves? We need to combine the habitat protection with where the fish move from this project. And then those ecosystem effects can provide fuller protection and sustainable long-term management of our species, so we can all benefit rather than just a few. I encourage you to look at a chapter in a book where some of these thoughts have emerged, that was published some time ago. You can contact me. I have a version of the paper, but we are moving forwards with protection of spaces for our fish, which is a good thing. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. That was perfect. So just to remind you, if you do have any questions for Jean-Luc, please do post them in the Q&A function. That's at the bottom of your screen. Okay, our second keynote from the other side of the channel is Erwan Kemeneur. He is from the Finistère Fisheries and Marine Farming Committee in Brittany. Over to you, Erwan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erwan Kemeneur. I'm in charge of missions at the Finistère Committee, and for the Fish Intel project, it is a very ambitious one, very interesting for us, for our fishermen. The Finistère represents 600 fishermen, and they are very enthusiastic about knowing about the different travelings, movements of crawfish, for example, on the Britain coast in Brittany, or the sea bass as well. And this has enabled us to show us that their different travelings, the Fish Intel technology has proven, if it works, it will prove and help us really track their movements, and it will help us in the management of the fishing. Concerning the play for the pollock, there is a special expectation, a high expectation from the profession, from these. I know along the French coast now for a few years, we haven't had an assessment, a real of the stock, or not in a regular manner. And professionals have noticed a decrease or a change of the fish behavior, and they're very worried. They are delighted to see that there is a program that is focusing on this subject, and if there are they are waiting to see if the results are good to adopt the process. So for Fish Intel, we are located at the extreme west coast of Brittany, and we are at the heart of the natural park of Iroise. We are working on the question on crawfish, and even if we had different trials of the marking of the different species, this is an example, a cross-border cooperation, French, English, but also Belgian, as was said, which is very interesting, and we encourage our professionals to follow it and do it. So I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was great. Okay, so that's our keynotes. Now we have 3 presentations from 3 more project partners. Our first one is Dr. Tom Stamp from my research group, who's a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Plymouth. Over to you, Tom.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks. I'll just share my screen now. Can you see my screen, Emma?
Yeah, I think it's just loading. Or okay, it's still dark.
Try again.
I think it said we can try again.
How about now?
That's it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Tom Stamp. I work at the University of Plymouth on the Fish Intel project, and I'm just going to give you a quick presentation on how we track fish underwater and the progress we've made to date setting up our various fish tracking projects. Okay, so for those of you who aren't very familiar with animal tracking, things like birds, land animals, and even some marine animals can be tracked through something called GPS tracking. And that involves attaching a tag to an animal, and that tag can detect signals emitted by GPS satellites. And using this information, we can sort of calculate the position of the animal, sorry. But unfortunately, things like GPS and even radio tracking don't really work very well underwater. And that's because the signals can't travel very far underwater. And we have to therefore use a variety of other techniques to track animals in this environment. And so for things like fish or really any animal that lives underwater for a large amount of its lifetime, we have to use other techniques. And so one of these techniques is called acoustic telemetry, and this is the main method that we're tracking animals within Fish Intel. And this basically relies on two main components. The first is an acoustic transmitter tag, which gets attached to or implanted within an animal. And this tag will constantly emit a unique signal or ping regularly over a long time period. So we can program these transmitters to emit a unique signal, say every 90 seconds for a period of 1 to 2 years, depending on how big the battery is on that transmitter. These transmitters constantly go off as the animal is swimming around. And whenever that animal is within range of what we call an acoustic receiver, the receiver will log the time and date that animal was detected. And then that data is stored on the receiver. We then have to go back to this receiver every sort of maybe 3 months and download that data and analyze it to work out what the animal's doing. So depending on what your specific research question is, you can set your receivers up in different ways to get different information. So one approach would be to put receivers in specific locations and as well as part of a wider network. And that will basically enable you to work out how much time the animal spends within a particular site. So that's something referred to as residency. Or you can look at connectivity between these locations. And on the right, I've got a map which sort of summarizes some research we've been doing over the past few years, where we've been tracking European bass across the southwest coast of the UK. And basically, we found that fish were moving between different estuaries, and there's quite a lot of connectivity and wide-scale movement, and that was quite novel information that we didn't previously know. This is an example of this at a smaller scale. So each red crosshair is an individual receiver that we deployed. And the areas in blue are sort of protected areas. And we were interested to know how much time European bass spent within these protected areas. So each color-coded point is an individual fish. And because the transmitters inside these fish emit a unique signal, we can name each fish and we know where each individual is moving. And that's really important for us. If you think about how you might behave to how somebody else might behave, it's really important to measure how much variability there is between different individuals. And that enables us to make sort of broad scale statements on how these populations are behaving or how they're using different habitats. Another approach that you can use is really tightly clustering your receivers in a specific area, and that can give you really high detailed data on where these animals are, and it can potentially give an accuracy of within 1 to 10 meters. So on the right here, I've got just a sort of summary of some data that we got from another project. And while this isn't a species that we're tracking within Fish Intel, it just sort of highlights the kind of data that you can get. So this is a tracking study of European lobster, which we tracked underneath a mussel farm in the south coast of the UK. And each point is a position where we recorded that animal, and they're color-coded by the individual. So we've got data from 3 different animals in this plot, and the sort of hashed areas are where the animals spent most of their time, their sort of core area. And this kind of information can really tell you a lot more about how these animals interact, how they're interacting with the environment, and give you quite a detailed assessment of what habitats they're using. So for Fish Intel, we're using a combination of these approaches to track animals within our pilot sites and also between our pilot sites. And we're going to combine this data with seabed habitat information and any sort of other environmental data we can get, such as water temperature and salinity, to really describe how our target species are moving within and between our pilot sites, and on also what habitats are really important for these animals. And a really key thing that we're trying to highlight at this project is that the data that we're collecting is going into a centralized repository, which is housed at the European Tracking Network. And that allows us to not only track our animals within our project, but also potentially on receivers outside of the project. So we and other researchers across Europe upload your data to the European Tracking Network, and then we can see where our fish are, even outside of our receiver range. And on the map on the right, I've got an illustration of where our receivers are currently deployed. So we've currently got receivers deployed across the Isles of Scilly and Cornwall, South Devon, and at the Belgium site, which is called the LifeWatch Network. And across the winter and next spring, we're going to be deploying additional receivers at these sites, but also at the Sussex, Seine Bay, Côtes d'Or, and Mer d'Ivoire Sea. We will be tagging and tracking our target species across these receivers. But by using this centralized European Tracking Network repository, we can also track our fish moving in different receiver networks. So the green points at the top of the map are receivers deployed by another research group at the University of Swansea. And this approach will enable us to track our fish in their receivers and their fish in our receivers. Okay, great. That's all for me. If you've got any questions, then please do ask them in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tom. Good timing too. Our next speaker this morning is Mathieu Voyer. He's from Ifremer, and he is a researcher in fisheries sciences. Gosh, I need an interpreter. Okay, over to you, Mathieu.
Thank you, Emma. I'm going to speak in French. Good morning to each and every one of you. I'm a researcher in fisheries sciences at Ifremer, and I'm participating in this Fish Intel project. So I'm going to present you, or to make a presentation about essential fish habitats analysis and how we can characterize this habitat. So first, what is an essential habitat? These are key areas in the life of fish. And depending on their age, they will occupy such and such areas. But these areas provide environmental conditions that are necessary to vital functions, for example, for feeding, for reproduction, etc. So these, where fish reproduce themselves, we call them spawning grounds. When they feed, we call them feeding grounds. So all these grounds and areas will be frequented by various species during the life cycle. So on the right, you have a diagram showing the European sea bass life cycle. So let's start with the adult phase. Adult bass feed in shallow waters near the coast. Then they migrate to the sea for spawning. Eggs float in plankton and drift. These eggs produce larvae. Larvae drift inshore, so back to the coast. And here you will have juveniles. And these juveniles will grow and spend 4 to 5 years in shallow coastal lagoons and estuaries, and they become adolescent. They will mature and will adopt the same behavior as their parents. So they will move from spawning grounds to feeding grounds, so spawning ground and feeding grounds. So as you can see that these species, in this case bass, occupy very different essential habitats in their lives. So this movement between these habitats is essential to understand. It is essential that we understand this movement between the habitats to preserve the species. So as part of the Fish Intel program, we have tried to characterize these essential habitats. First, we collect information, data about these habitats, and we're trying to correlate them with acoustic data recorded through our receiver network of receivers. So here we have some maps provided by Norwegian colleagues. So here you have receivers, so you have images, maps of a fjord, so you have information about the sea bottom. So you have also images of the different elements you can have at the bottom of the fjords. You have sand, you have rocks, etc. And they also have represented acoustic telemetry data for 3 species: pollock, cod, and ballan wrasse. So we can see how the habitat is used by these species and see what functions these species need. So they have to sustain at certain period of the year in the various species. So the idea is really to assess the sensitivity of habitats to different risks. The idea is really to understand their fragility and to understand how sensitive they are to these risks. So, for example, we looked at the extraction of aggregates, development of offshore wind power, fishing activities, water quality. So once we characterize these essential habitats in the various pilot sites, we will try to see how our target species move from one habitat to another, and between the sites in the English Channel. Another objective of our work is also to create a software tool to collect, so based on all the data collected, and then would be made available to stakeholders to exploit this tracking device data. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much, Mathieu. Please do remember to ask any questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Okay, right. Our next speaker before the break is Katia Frangoud, and she is a researcher in marine resource governance at the University of Brest. Katia, I'm handing it over to you.
Good morning to every one of you. My name is Katia Frangoud. I'm a researcher at the University of Brest. I work for the Amur Research Unit. which is at the European Institute for the Sea in Brest. I'm a researcher in social sciences, and I'm here to talk about the human dimension and also the ecosystem-based management of fisheries. So as we said, so the objective of this program is to contribute to an ecosystem-based fisheries management in the English channels. How? By pooling the knowledge of professional people, by combining scientific data, tracking data, and combining them with habitat maps that will be translated into ecosystem services. So how do we work? We have the objective is really to conduct interviews and meetings with professional fishermen, but also other fishermen like recreative anglers, etc., scuba diving clubs, underwater fishing members too. In this program, we have a number of sub-action. The first one concerns the engagement of stakeholders in the development of ecosystem-based management plans. And there are three phases. First, the development of these management plans. Second, an intermediary consultation. And once we have the first results from the tracking campaign, with first information about the movements of fish, we will have discussions with the various stakeholders about how we can improve these management plans. And the idea being to move to the third phase, which is a validation of these management plans. So, and the second sub-action concerns mapping of ecosystem services. The objective here is to produce a report on how to implement such ecosystem-based fisheries management and how this management can improve ecosystem services. Second objective is also to produce an online web atlas, a FishIntel web atlas. So the idea is to provide information about the ecosystem services and essential habitats for our target species. The third action is about providing assistance to fishing professionals. So the idea is to establish a roadmap in order to introduce new management measures. And what we want to do is to pool all the different knowledge, that is fish tracking, data about habitats, knowledge of stakeholders, to produce this roadmap for each of the target species. So this being the bluefin tuna, crawfish, pollock, and bass. Again, the objective is really to promote local cooperation between fisheries fishing communities and other stakeholders in order to integrate information about movements and habitats used by fish and to be able to produce a management plan for sustainable fisheries. We also have gathered other results that will help us reinforce the knowledge of stakeholders on how to use telemetry, because we also plan to have some transfer of knowledge on how to use telemetry. And we also want to have cross-border networking or promote cross-border networking through online and in-person events like the webinar we have now, and by having also organizing meeting between stakeholders on both sides of the channel. So this is what we're going to do. So was a presentation of the part of the work about governance, ecosystem services, and governance. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Katia. So we're running a little bit ahead of time now. So please do take sort of next 5 minutes to post your questions in the Q&A tab, and then the team will field these to our presenters in the Q&A session. So I'm going to just give you a slightly longer break, and we'll stick to our planned schedule of being back here at 30 minutes past the hour. So 10:30 in the UK, 11:30 in France. Thank you all, and we'll see you in 20 minutes. Hello, welcome back. Okay, now I'm going to hand over to our team, to Charlene and Ada, who are going to help field the questions that you've posted to us. So thank you. There's some fantastic questions that I think are going to really challenge our panelists, so that's great. So I'm going to hand over to you guys and give me a shout if you need any help.
Okay, so I will start with the first question, which is for Tom, from Salvador Potter. What's the smallest size that fish can be tagged? How is larval movement monitored?
Thanks, Salvador. It's really important to say from the outset that when we tag fish, we have to do it under an ethical license, which is issued by the UK Home Office. And there's similar systems within France and across the EU. And basically within these ethical licensing, there is quite strict confines on the size of fish you can or cannot tag. So within our license, we're allowed to tag fish down to around sort of 20 centimeters. However, you can get really, really small tags, which people have used in salmon smolts, which I think roughly are around sort of 10 centimeters long. So it's not really possible to use this technology to track larval fish just because of the weight and the burden of the tag on the animal. But other ways people do it is by tracking larval fish is by using like netting surveys, like fine mesh netting surveys, or possibly plankton toes. But obviously that's really logistically challenging and has its own like positives and negatives. I hope I answered the question there.
Thank you, Tom. I have another question for Mathieu from David Curtis. So regarding the habitat different species prefer, are you able to link habitats with types of food and the availability of food?
So for Fish and Tell, for the project, we do not look at the link that exists between the habitat and the trophic resource, what is available for the different species, for their food. So the question is very relevant, and there will be no acquired data on the field on this topic, but we will be able to make a link with documented resources to characterize the different habitats that we will take into account. Thank you.
Next question is for Katja from Georgina Carlson. How will the ecosystem-based fisheries management tie in with the fisheries management plans that are due to be developed in the UK?
I don't know how it works in the United Kingdom. I have no idea of that. I don't know how you'll do it in the future, so I cannot answer to this question, unfortunately. I apologize.
I can answer from the UK side. I think that this information, particularly in the coastal fringe, so the tagging work that Tom has done on bass and the crawfish, and maybe some of the pollock research will be used more by the inshore fisheries and conservation authorities to manage their resources more locally. How that is then used in French governance of things like protected habitat, I'm not sure.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. I have now a question from Salvador Potter to Emma. I imagine the project will essentially, at some point, engage with local fishing communities. So at what stage is this planned and through what channels?
Thank you, Salvador. The consultation with local communities and local, the IFCAs, the inshore fisheries and conservation authorities, has already started. So as you can see, our pilot sites are spanning quite large areas. So there's more people to get around than we possibly can within this relatively short project. But we've already started consultation in the Isles of Scilly, talking to both recreational and commercial fishers in South Devon. And we're also talking to the different IFCAs, so the Cornwall IFCA, Devon and Severn IFCA, and just yesterday we had a good meeting with Southern IFCA as well. And the plans to start the work in Sussex will be next summer. So please do contact us if we haven't got to key people yet, and to if you can help us to make those contacts, that would be really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Next question is for the whole panel from Charlotte Coombs from Marine Conservation Society. Is the project looking at seasonal management or only at area closures? Why were these species selected? Does it relate to concerns about stock sizes or existing management measures?
Shall I start with that question? So the reason why these species were selected was because they represent quite key components for local fisheries. So European bass and pollock are really quite commercially valuable within the inshore fishing fleets within the southwest and generally across the south coast of the UK. And I think that's the same for our equivalent sites in northern France and Belgium. And what is really key about the data that we're collecting is that it's allowing us to continuously track the animals across the battery life of the tag. And so we'll be able to really see how these fish use these habitats and how that changes with different seasons and different years and generally across the region that we're monitoring. I hope I've answered that question, but if not, then please do say anything in the Q&A.
Would anybody else like to add to that? I think the part of the question, Charlotte, about whether we're informing seasonal closures is that the real focus here is on protecting habitats. And so if we can encourage the less destructive fishing gears, then potentially we could be informing seasonal closures due to the data that Tom's just been describing. But certainly it's fundamentally we're trying to protect habitats that are so important as nursery and feeding areas for these species. So if nobody else wants to add anything, we'll take the next question.
Thank you, Emma. I have a few questions for Tom from Joe Dennett regarding the marine tags. How much data can be encoded in a tag, and over what range can tags be detected? And more about the tags, do you use open protocols coding, and can the data transmitted by tags be easily decoded?
Okay, that's a really great question. So you can encode the ID of the animal, and you can also encode the depth, the temperature, and then you can also there's a range of sensors that you can add to these tags, which gets broadcast when the tag emits its signal. Within Fish Intel, there's a kind of mix. So within the UK, we're focusing on ID tags, but within the Belgium and French sites, they're using depth and temperature sensors as well. In regard to whether we're using open protocol within the transmitters. So what this refers to is when the tags emit their signal, there's a variety of different essentially software packages that these that these signals can be detected on. And there's a particular software package called Open Protocol, which basically allows any tag from most suppliers to be detected on any receiver. And so in the project, we've got some receivers that are going to be on Open Protocol, and they're going to jointly listen to Open Protocol and what's called R64K. And that's because in the UK, we've got a legacy of equipment from a different supplier, which we need to use for the projects, basically. So we're tagging on R64K and other people are tagging on Open Protocol. And using this combination of approaches, we're going to be able to detect fish across all our pilot sites, basically. So I hope I answered that question. Again, if I didn't make myself clear, then please do email me separately or ask in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Next question is for Matthew from David Curtis. Have you picked up shoaling activity?
I think the question was more about the acoustic tracking, whether you've kind of detected shoaling activity in that. So maybe Tom might be better off answering that.
So at the moment, the tagging's only just started. So we've tagged 36 crawfish in the Isles of Scilly and 30 bluefin tuna, and the pollock and bass tagging is due to start this winter and continue on to next spring. So at the moment for Fish Intel, we haven't generated much data yet. But from prior work where we've tagged European bass before, I think we have seen some evidence of where certain fish have been detected on the same receivers in roughly the same time period. Luckily, we had somebody who was underwater in the same sort of area at the same sort of time, and they did get pictures of quite large shoals of bass. Yes, I think we have in prior research projects detected shoaling activity, but at the moment we haven't got that much data for Fish Intel. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I have now a question for Katja about how will you be identifying the key stakeholders for each species or site?
We are in the process of creating a map of the different actors in all of the pilot sites with the links existing between the different actors in order to see whether there are strong links between them, and then produce this mapping. This map will be produced very soon for each of the sites, and I believe that it will be ready in a few months now.
Thank you, Katja. Next question is for Emma from Robin Broadley. Is there a danger that increased knowledge of fish movements and habitats could lead to greater exploitation of these species? Or conversely, could this lead to more areas being closed to such activity?
Thank you, Robin. I think we have to do something. So the status quo is leading to unsustainable fishing and large-scale important habitat destruction. So I completely understand your concerns, but we hope that with better information that we can provide evidence to properly protect these habitats. So it's just taking a new approach. So it's not just managing a fish stock, but it's managing the fundamental building blocks of the ecosystem that is absolutely essential to support healthy populations of species of commercial and conservation importance. So yeah, I completely take your point, but hopefully we'll provide evidence in order to better manage these species. Probably a conversation to be had, after the webinar with a beer in normal times.
Thank you, Emma.
I think we're just coming to the end of our session, so please do ask another question, and then we should move on with the next two presentations.
Okay, so I have one last question for any of the speakers who have mentioned essential fish habitats from Libby West. Lists from the US suggest if you include all feeding, spawning, migration, and nursery areas as essential fish habitats, you would designate the whole sea. How do we prioritize which habitats are the most important? And can we develop some principles from the offset to avoid pitfalls identified in its early introduction in the US?
Shall I have a go at this? Because I answered it by typing. So there is an answer on the chat. But I use an analogy that has been very successful in conservation, which is turtle conservation. Turtle conservation has always protected in the last decades the area of the greatest stock, which is the nesting beaches. And this is for two reasons. One, it's more pragmatic because to protect the beaches is much easier than to protect the open seas. And two, it's the greatest amount of stock of the organism that you're trying to conserve. And it's been hugely successful. Similarly, some of the work that Tom is presenting about bass shows that they use estuaries. So we need to see things like net bans in estuaries. And that is starting with our IFCAs. They are putting in these set net bans, which is imperative for bass, so that we don't catch small animals before they recruit into the adult population. Similarly, with crawfish, there are a couple of marine protected areas now which are designated for the species where they cannot be taken. And when they saw decline in the 1970s and 80s with divers and trammel nets, we didn't have any protected areas. So we're in a better place than we were a generation ago to see better management of these species as they recover. Bluefin is another issue, which is very interesting. But again, because of more interest in conservation, I think we are going to see an angling community that is wanting to protect rather than harvest the species. So there is much more likely in society an area within our community that will want to see long-term preservation of these species. So it's a good question. And much of the responsibility of the protection can happen for the juvenile and subadult stages inshore for some of these species that is already within some marine protected area management.
Did any of the other panelists want to?
Can I just say something? Yeah. So I would just say that's a really good question. And essentially one of the main premises of the project is that we're going to be tracking these species, and then that data will be presented to the relevant stakeholders. That includes fisheries managers or statutory bodies in both the UK and in France and Belgium. While we will analyse the data, it will very much be led by those stakeholders on what they think is essential to protect. And so it won't just be us defining what is essential. It will be led by both the animals that we're tracking and the people that we ask, we interrogate with the data, basically. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks, Tom. Matteo, do you want to add something?
Yes, I'd like to add one thing. We can also look to quantify the importance of these essential habitats by the intensity with which the species is present in these different habitats. So there are habitats that have less numbers of species, and we can prioritize depending on the presence in these different habitats and through the contribution, for example, of a spawning area so we can look at variations in terms of quantities for the different habitats.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your questions. They're fantastic. I hope if the team can make sure that we keep a good record of all these questions and contacts that have been posted in there and the chat, that'd be great. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next two speakers. The first one is Pascal Prévost from the League for the Protection of Birds from Brittany. Pascal, I'm going to hand over to you.
Good morning. I'm going to share my screen.
Yeah, that's great.
So we're pleased to be a partner to this Fish and Tail program. The LPO, the League for the Protection of Birds, is totally invested in protected biodiversity in France, and we are part of the BirdLife International Network. So we manage a number of reserves, including the Sept-Îles Reserve in France, in cooperation with the state. So we're going to make a presentation about the Sept-Îles Reserve, the Sept-Îles Marine Protected Area, and what we do here. So first, the Sept-Îles is a marine protected area that was created in 1972. But early on in 1912, it was this area was already a bird sanctuary for puffins. So it's a very important area for sea birds. 10% of seabirds frequent this area, and we have. And also, it's also very important for grey seals. So 3/4 of the births of grey seals happen here in our archipelago. So we manage the area based on knowledge that's fed by a number of universities, research institutes in France and abroad. This nature reserve covers the Sept-Îles archipelago, which is a 280 hectare area, but there is a project to expand the area to have a marine reserve covering 700 hectares by the end of 2022. So the idea is really to improve the protection in the archipelago. The Sept-Îles Reserve, in connection with the LPO, will help position and maintain acoustic receivers, and will help tracking species, because we have 3 employees, including 2 professional scuba divers. So we know we know the area, and we have regular contacts with the fisheries committee and professional fishers in the area. So as manager of the Sept-Îles Reserve, We also provide other functions. For example, we have a visitor center in the Sept-Îles, and we receive 50,000 visitors yearly in the Sept-Îles. So the idea is really to promote, improve knowledge about it, and especially about crawfish, which is now coming in greater numbers in the area. The objective of the program is to establish connection links between the fish intel sites. So the objective is to better understand the connection between large distribution species like bass and pollock and the Sept-Îles archipelago. We also want to assess the importance of marine habitats for species like kelp forests, underwater dunes, or eelgrass beds, and to assess the importance of these habitats for the target species. And the acoustic array that will be installed in our areas will in the future be used for other species like sharks and also fish that are prey for seabirds and graces, for example, perch, monkfish, or ballet wrasse. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pascal. Charlene and Ida, do we have any questions yet for Pascal? While you're having a look, Pascal, are there other species that you would like to add to the Fish Intel list to tag and track in the reserve?
Yes, I mentioned a number of species at the end of our slideshow, especially fish that are used as feed for seabirds, like ballet wrasse, perch, for example, and why not monkfish too. Mm. But we have about 30 fish species that are used by predators, that are prey for predators, and that could be included.
That's great, thank you. Does the team have any questions to put to Pascal?
Yeah, just one question popped up. Do you have the ability to introduce management into the protected area?
Well, the idea is really the protected area, in all stakeholders are involved in the marine protected area, including fishers. So based on the knowledge collected, it will be possible to introduce management measures in consultation with the nature reserve, yes.
Super. Did you have any other questions?
We have another question for Pascal. You mentioned sharks. Are there any particular species you would like to tag?
Yes, once Abnanasus shark. We also have a program called AMNA that is piloted by Apex, is an NGO. So it's a species that is we see this species, this shark species in our area. The idea is really to be able to track this shark because we know that we sometimes see it near the coast, but also further at sea. So yes, this species is clearly something that you want to include.
Thank you. Okay, is that all the questions from the team?
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres?
No, c'est bon. Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Pascal. It just highlights that Fish Intel, we're making a start, but we are creating a network that has so much opportunities to build on in both size and time, but also all the different important species that we would love to add to the mix so we can understand how they're interacting with each other as well as with habitats. So we hope this is just the beginning. Our next speaker, our final speaker from this morning is Lydie Courtier, and she is a researcher in fish ecology at France Energy Marine. Over to you, Lydie. Yeah, that looks good.
I'm going to speak French, so thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you to talk about the contribution of France Énergie Marine. My name is Lydie Couturier. I'm in charge of research at France Énergie Marine on interactions between fish populations and EMRs, or ORE. We're going to say who we are, what we do, what the interest of Fish Intel for these renewable energies, and how we were able to use it for other things as well. So France Énergie Marine is a research institute, a national institute dedicated to the ORE, offshore renewable energies. We are working on those through research and collaborative work with services around expertise and the themes that we master. Within the Institute, we have 4 programs that are cross-functional and complementary. The environmental integration, and in this program, we study the effects of the OREs, the renewable energies, with the different ecosystems. We also work with international work groups, and we aim at working together to better understand and to solve the impact of climate on these renewable energies. So we work on wind farms and renewable energies in the sea in a more general way. So for Fish Intel, for the ORE, this answers to needs and also challenges, scientific challenges for the needs that we have identified. We have seen the increase of the knowledge of ecosystems and the effects of these offshore wind parks in the marine environment, but also to assess the effects, we must have the adapted tools that will help us see the effects and monitor them, track them. So we have scientific and technical challenges, as in any marine environment. It's a little hostile, difficult to access. There's a lack of knowledge, basic knowledge concerning a lot of different species. And also the question of what scale must be used. Is it a local scale, regional scale, global scale? So all of this represents limitations when you need means to follow. So the Fish Intel project helps answer these needs, provide a solution, have the right infrastructure to follow in a continuous way where the fish go, where they travel. The role of France Énergie Marines within the Fish Intel project is to spread the network of acoustic telemetry into wind parks, offshore parks in the channel, as you can see on the map. And through our participation, we contributed to improve the knowledge on the different fish in these areas, where are their essential habitats, and what would be the potential role of these parks, these farms, and what impact it could have. So it creates a link between the public, academic actors and the industrials, EMR industrials, by working with them, working together, and putting at disposal a relevant infrastructure. France Énergie Marine is positioning itself as a key actor in the French network for acoustic telemetry, because the Fish Intel project helps us or enables us. It's a springboard, a stepping stone that enables us to work on other projects as well. And thanks to Fish Intel, we have been able to develop this fish out project to look at the infrastructure and use it in different sites and to electrosensitive species, and maintaining the regional networks as well. The fish off project is the use of the same technology, acoustic telemetry, with different scales, to put in place strategies that are efficient to follow, to monitor the effects and track the fish, the movements of the fish. So we are interested at a very thin scale, looking at 3-dimensional of fish in the structure. We're talking about meters in meters. So for these farms, what is how many fish are there? We also look at the previous work and the regional scale. We rely on these areas, those in the Mediterranean Sea as well, to look at the movements of the fish and connectivity between the different habitats for these fish. The final objective is to integrate this approach using this acoustic telemetry. What we would like to do is to use it on a larger scale with a combination of different methodologies that are comprehensive and complementary, and therefore we can have a better image of the different populations in an area and look at these offshore wind farms as well. So it's a big project that between 2021, 2024, we have public, private partners, associations who work with us as well. So this is all for me. So Fish Intel is a real advantage for us. And through this innovative, adapted technologies, we can follow and track the fish. Thank you very much for your attention.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lydie. Do we have questions for Lydie already?
Yes, we have one question for Lydie from Samuel Lumière from Ocean Winds. The vital and structuring role of wrecks in the channel on fish populations is systematically neglected. Could the project take this into account and instrument wrecks that are excellent checkpoints for several species of commercial interest, for example, sea bass, pollock, sea bream, cod, etc.? Yes, of course, sorry. The vital and structuring role of wrecks in the channel on fish populations is systematically neglected. Could the project take this into account and instrument wrecks that are excellent checkpoints for several species of commercial interest?
Shipwrecks, Liddy.
The role of the wrecks for for fish are taken into account by Fish Intel. And this is why we have this partnership. And we are going to focus on wind farms where they're going to put in place, and by working with developers on the best way to deploy our receivers within following what is most relevant for fish. And we are going to also work on these farms, on these pilot areas that integrate these wrecks. And we have identified these areas as important zones for essential habitats for the different species.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yes, another one for Lydie. Do the acoustic receivers work? Oh, sorry, I was in the French language. So I repeat, do the acoustic receivers work close to the wind farms? Is there any problems with communication pathways?
So if the receivers, are the receiver working next to the turbines in the wind farms? Yes, what I understand from the question is that these receivers are going to work well when close to the turbines. And usually for the frequency of the reception of these receivers from the noise, there is noise issued by these turbines, but we haven't noticed any problems from that. This will be measured. Of course, we record the ambient sound. It is all recorded. So sometimes we will see, yes, if there are issues when these farms are functioning. But for the moment, we haven't noted any issue with that.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
That was the last question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlene. Thank you, Lydie. And well, I think so. We're coming to the close of our webinar this morning. So it just leaves me to thank everybody. Thank you to all of our attendees for coming today to hear about our project, all the project partners, and some of which couldn't speak today because we didn't have time. But hopefully they'll get a chance to present at one of our next meetings. So we will be in touch about future events. As you might imagine, we now have a lot of work to do over this next year to tag and track the fish and engage with our stakeholders and all of you, hopefully. So as you can see now on the screen, here are a number of ways to contact us through email address, through Twitter, through LinkedIn. Please do feel free as well to contact any of our presenters directly. But also, if you want to contact them through the email on screen now, that's also fine. You should be able to find us just by Googling Fish Intel Plymouth. And I invite you to have a look at our website. So I also, who we haven't thanked yet is our funders. So thank you so much to Interreg France, England Channel. You provide us an amazing opportunity to work between organisations and countries in this truly international project. And of course, thank you to our interpreters who allow us to work so freely between different languages. I think that's been an amazing feat today. So thank you very much for your effort. And then, of course, to all the people who've helped run this webinar today, the university support team, the Fish Intel team. Yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to close today's webinar. Thanks again to all the speakers, and we will be in touch. I have been told to just mention that if anybody does want a recording of the webinar today, to please contact us and we can send it directly. Okay, lovely. Lunchtime. Thanks very much. Goodbye.